I'm Paul Wright Jameson, and I bring greetings from the Wright family on this, the 117th anniversary of the first flight. When I was growing up, we lived near my grandparents, whose house was filled with Wright brothers memorabilia. We heard lots of stories. Today, I'm going to tell you about my favorite one. My grandmother was the first little girl in America to fly. To begin, let's look at the Wright family tree. The patriarch was Milton Wright, who was a bishop with the Church of the United Brethren in Christ. He married Susan Kerner in 1859. After moving around for many years, they finally settled in Dayton, Ohio in 1884 and lived there for the rest of their lives. Their first child, Rushlin, was born in 1861. He and his family moved out west in 1889. Their second child, Lauren, was born in 1862. He and his family, including my grandmother Leontine, stayed in Dayton and was heavily involved in the doings of Wilbur and Orville. Wilbur Wright was born in 1867. In 1870, the twins Otis and Ida were born, but they died in infancy. Orville Wright was born in 1871. The youngest, Catherine, was born in 1874. Everyone named so far, with the exception of Rushlin, are buried in Woodland Cemetery in Dayton. During the 2003 centennial celebrations, there was a wreath-laying ceremony, and two Ohio boys, John Glenn and Neil Armstrong, officiated. Rushlin had 4 children: Catherine, who died young, Helen, Herbert, and Bertha Elway. They lived out west, although they came to Dayton from time to time to visit their cousins. Lauren also had 4 children: Milton, Ivanette, Leontine, and Horace. We will focus on my grandmother, Leontine.
I was born on September 17, 1898, and I've been told that I arrived before the doctor did. That was at our home on Horace Street in Dayton, Ohio. My mother's sister was visiting at our home. She helped in the emergency, and all was well when the doctor got there. My earliest remembrance is of an event which happened when I was only 2 years old. My 3 Western cousins with their parents came from Kansas to visit us at Christmas time in 1900. There was a beautiful, big, brilliantly lighted Christmas tree at my grandfather's house, and we all joined hands and danced around it. Very exciting and unforgettable. This was the first time I had heard anyone except my brother and sister call my dad's father Grandpa. These other children, I thought, were trespassing on my private property. I crawled into Grandfather's lap, he used to tell me, took him by the chin, turned his face to me, and said, "You is my grandpa, isn't you?" Leontine's older sister, Ivanette, remembers, Orville never seemed to tire of playing with us. If he ran out of games, he would make candy. If he happened to be busy with something else, he would make caramel, which was easier to make, and the kind children couldn't eat fast. If he had time, he made fudge with a long thermometer to test how long it should be boiled. It was carefully beaten to the right consistency, and it was delicious. Wilbur would amuse us in an equally wholehearted way, but not for long. If we happened to be sitting on his lap, he would straighten out his long legs and we would slide off. That was a signal for us to find something else to do. Leontine wrote, "This home of ours on 2nd Street was near the bicycle shop operated by my uncles Orville and Wilbur. This was where much of the inventing and building of the first airplane had originated. Often we went down the alley to this shop, only a block away, and into the back room where very interesting things were going on. There was a wind tunnel testing small plane conformations, a motor humming noisily, and my uncles in their work aprons, toiling away on engines and all sorts of curious equipment for their planes." In 1909, after the Wright brothers had become world famous, they returned home to Dayton from Europe. The people of Dayton had arranged a homecoming celebration. This started out with a parade on Main Street, and I rode in the buggy with my grandfather and the Wright brothers. I was 11 years old and pretty proud. I thoroughly enjoyed that trip down the triumphant route to the fairgrounds, where the family sat on the platform and listened to the speeches honoring Uncle Will and Uncle Orv. In 1911, when my Uncle Orv was demonstrating the airplane in Europe, I heard that he had taken a little French girl up for a flight. She was May de Lambert, the daughter of a good friend. I wrote to him right away and said that I'd like to be the first little girl in America to fly. When Uncle Orv got home later that year and was flying at Sims Station near Dayton, I went out there one day with my sister Ivanette and my cousin Elway, who was visiting our family. My mother and my grandfather were with us. Uncle Orv took each youngster up for a short flight, and he took me first. Captain Chandler, one of his flying students, loaned me his leather jacket and goggles, and I sat strapped into a seat on the lower wing of the plane, with my feet on a strut in front. Uncle Orv sat beside me at the controls, and the motor was just back of us.
This is a good time to note that Leontine would have flown in a Model B flyer, like the reproduction in this picture. Instead of skids, it has wheels, and the elevator is now in the rear, so there's a less obstructed frontal view. Leontine would have sat next to Orville, as in this picture.
We went roaring off and up and soared around at perhaps 400 feet in altitude for about 10 minutes. It was breathtaking, but not scary at all. I felt perfectly safe with Uncle Orv right there beside me piloting the plane. I remember seeing my mother down below looking very small and waving a white handkerchief at us. Then we glided down, and Elwyn and then Ivanette had their turns. Just then we heard and saw the traction coming, and we all raced to the station in time to ride the interurban trolley into Dayton to end a memorable day. Ivanette wrote, "Then it was my turn. We used Captain Chandler's leather coat and gloves. I wore a small hat with a scarf over it tied under my chin to keep it on. After the others had climbed in and out of the plane so carefully so that they wouldn't trip the wire that turned off the gas, I climbed in for my ride. The seat was on the wing with our feet out over the edge on a strut, no cockpit. We took off, and soon everything on the ground was dwarfed. We circled around over the field at Sims, and after about 7 minutes or so, Uncle Orv pointed to the traction car approaching in the distance. He shouted above the noise of the engine, "Here comes the traction. Shall we try to catch it?" I nodded. We came down. I slid out under the wires, handed over the coat and gloves to Captain Chandler as I went by the hangar and made a run for it. The traction car was now stopped and taking on passengers, so we made it easily. After graduating from Steele High School in 1916, I attended Oberlin College for a year, but transferred to Mount Holyoke in the fall of 1917. The First World War was in full swing, and things were not as pleasant in South Hadley as they might have been. After a half year there, I returned to Oberlin and graduated there in 1920.
My grandfather, John Hulbert Jameson Sr., was born in Oberlin, Ohio in 1896 and went to Oberlin with the class of 1918. When World War I came, he volunteered and became an ambulance driver in Italy, much as Ernest Hemingway and Somerset Maugham did. He returned to Oberlin in 1919. He wrote, "That spring I began to be aware for the first time of a person named Leontine Wright. She was a junior now and had the lead in the commencement play, Prunella. I remember seeing her for the first time in that play. Leontine was now one of my classmates. I became well acquainted with her, met her at parties and at dances in the rec hall, but never had a date with her while she was in college. John moved to Cleveland and began working in the advertising agency that became McCann Erickson. By chance, he ran into Leontine, who was also in Cleveland. He wrote, "She invited me to have dinner the next evening with her roommates and herself, and things progressed right along from there on." Wilbur had died in 1912, and Orville built a mansion in Dayton that he called Hawthorne Hill. John wrote, "We were married on June 2nd, 1923, in the midst of one of those almost unbearable heat waves which sometimes inflict themselves on Dayton. It was before the days of air conditioning, but Uncle Orv, at whose home the ceremony took place, invented an air conditioner just for the occasion. In a room off the hallway where I was to await the fatal moment, he installed a big wash tub full of cracked ice, placed an electric fan behind it, and sat me in front of it. The blessedly cool air that was wafted over me was a lifesaver, I can tell you. And Uncle Orv's eyes danced, as they always did, when his ingenuity triumphed over a difficulty or when he pulled off a practical joke. Thereafter, he always delighted in reminding me of how he put John on ice." Leontine and John Hulbert Jameson Sr. had 2 children, whom they named Leontine and John Hulbert Jameson Jr., who was my father. Incidentally, a John Hulbert Jameson V was just born last November. Fast forward to 1969. That year, the Apollo 11 spacecraft blasted off, heading to the moon. I did not know at the time that Neil Armstrong had taken some pieces of the original 1903 flyer with him to the moon and brought them back.
I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The pieces were mounted with authentication letters from Neil Armstrong and an executor of Orville's estate, and my grandparents got a plaque. In 2003, on the 100th anniversary of the first flight, the Jameson family donated this plaque with the pieces of the 1903 flyer that had traveled to the moon and back to the Wright Brothers National Memorial. In the handoff ceremony, my siblings and I were joined on stage by that fellow in the blue shirt, Neil Armstrong. The plaque hung in the visitor center until the recent renovation. You can still see those pieces, minus the authentication letters, in the visitor center. We hope you enjoyed that story. My family has one piece of Wright memorabilia left. Orville had put a number of pieces of the 1903 plane in plexiglass with a letter authenticating the pieces. As you can see, he had edited the letter but left the unedited, retyped copy back in the plexiglass. We have this place normally stored away for safekeeping, but I wanted to show it to you one more time before we closed. We hope that we will see you in person at the next anniversary celebration and many celebrations after that. Thank you.